Hi, good afternoon, Eagles fans. Welcome to, I'm kind of starting to change the name to Eagles Chat, because that's basically what we've been doing is chatting about the Eagles. Still trying to hope to get my son on here to talk about his top, Eagles roster of 53 players, um, that will, of all time. And there's rules about that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So sensationalized news this week. First of all, I want to start out. I kind of always liked Jeremy Fowler, so I'm not sure what's going on with him. Um, but he's got his new top 10 list out. The top 10 list includes Jalen Hurts, ranked below Jaden Daniels and Herbert. So, what do you guys think? Evidently, there's a lot of controversy out there, even on some of the talk shows. I was watching First Takes clip, and a lot of people didn't like the fact that Hertz is number 9 on Fowler's list. Supposedly, this list comes from NFL executives, scouts, directors, player personnel, things like that. The the controversy around him being ninth, I can definitely see. They want, Justin Herbert showed nothing in the playoffs. He only had, I think, 3 picks all last year, had 4 against Houston. So how can you rank him as a better quarterback? Jaden Daniels, I kind of agreed with some of the takes on him that he's only done it for 1 year. My experience has been that a lot of quarterbacks take time to develop. And some may be the flash in the pan, come out, look great, but then they just kind of disappear. I think a lot of that is defensive coordinators, players pick up on their tendencies. And that's kind of what we saw with Carson Wentz. We saw this great quarterback. Everybody was saying, oh, he's better than Dak. He's better than Dak. And it turned out, once defensive coordinators found out you pressure him, he's going to throw to Zach Ertz. We double Zach Ertz. He doesn't do much. One of the earlier quarterbacks that I remember, is Don Majkowski of the Green Bay Packers. You know, he was this all world thing, made the cover of Sports Illustrated. For those of you who are old as I am to remember Sports Illustrated. Um, and everybody was singing his praises. He was the magic man. He was going to lead the Packers back to the promised land. Gets injured. Brett Favre comes in. We never hear from him again. He never picks up anywhere else. Um, when he did try, there were, teams, he wasn't the same guy. You could say that that's systems. I have a problem with system quarterbacks. It's not that I have a problem with them. I think quarterbacks are drafted to fit into a system. And you wouldn't want somebody who is a statue standing back there who doesn't run, who is, he's a better deep ball thrower than a short ball thrower. And yet you run RPOs with him where he's going to be throwing short. He's going to have to run, all those things. So there's there's that perception, and I get that. And people are calling Hertz as part of this thing a game manager. They're calling him let's say, a systems quarterback is even something I heard come up on First Take. However, wouldn't you want a quarterback who can run your system versus the first guy I described, who was just a statue and then try to run an RPO system? Not going to work. And I've seen this with great quarterbacks of the past. You know, there was a reason Montana was a third round pick coming out of college. He was a winner, a lot like Jalen Hurts. Not a lot thought of him, but within the Bill Walsh system, the West Coast system, he ran it to a T. We could say the same thing about another Hall of Famer from that 49ers team, Steve Young. Was he a systems quarterback? He did nothing in the USFL, for all intents and purposes, playing for the LA Express way back in the first incarnation of the USFL. And then, he was signed by Tampa Bay. Nothing. Little flashes of brilliance here and there, but nothing. Wins the job in San Francisco eventually, and Joe Montana gets traded to the Chiefs. He goes on to have a Hall of Fame career. We could argue systems there too. So that's crap that I don't like to hear. It's stuff that I don't like to expound upon a lot, even though I just did it. Is, do I think Hurts is a systems quarterback? Yes, because he fits the Philly system. He fits what the Eagles want to do. And you need a selfless quarterback in that position, which is exactly what Hurts is. His bottom line is, what does the scoreboard say? Did we win or did we lose? So if he comes out and he throws for 350 and they lose, to him, that's, unacceptable. So do I ever see him throwing for 4,000 yards and 40 TDs? Probably not. Not unless, God forbid, knock on wood, the unthinkable happens and Saquon gets hurt. That's the only way I ever see that happening. The other thing with that Jeremy Fowler's got out on his list is the top 10 receivers in the NFL. Knew there was going to be controversy when I heard about that list. He'd only had Devonta Smith as receiving votes. And it's the same group of individuals who picked the quarterbacks, scouts, directors of play and personnel, GMs, those guys. So, what do you guys think of that? What do you think of Devonta not being in the top 10? I can almost see it. There's still a thing about his size. People have been talking about it while he was at Alabama, that he was too small to be in the NFL. He was just under 1,000 yards this past season, but he scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl. I like what Rich Eisen said. Rich Eisen said, he's a big play receiver. He is a big time, big stage receiver. Yeah, he was just under 1,000 yards for the season for 2024. He'll probably be over, that this year. He may have been over that had he caught the touchdown pass against Washington in the game the Eagles lost in DC. But, he is that guy. He is that guy that's going to come up big when it matters. And when does it matter? Playoff time, Super Bowl time. Led the Eagles in receiving in both Super Bowls. He scored touchdowns in both Super Bowls. He is their number one guy to go to in clutch situations. They needed a clincher. They needed to put the Chiefs away. Boom. The quote unquote dagger, as we all know it now. So I think that his size, people forget about that. In today's voting and in today's NFL, everything is about stats. And that's why, there's this big prejudice against players who played in the 70s. They don't understand. Those were run-happy teams. The Eagles are a run-happy team. When you have Saquon Barkley back there, you're going to run the football a lot. He's still going to get his 25 touches a game. And Hurts is going to throw 25 times. But he has an arsenal of receivers. So do I have a problem with Devonta not being in the top 10? Not as much as some Eagles fans. And that's, like I said, it's the offense, and it's also being realistic about what these guys think. GMs want the prototypical receiver who looks like A.J. Brown. At least A.J. was in the top 5. And when you consider Chase, Jefferson, those guys, A.J. in the top 5 is perfectly acceptable. But that's what GMs want. That's what scouts want. They want that big play, big guy who's going to go up and body people. Your Mike Evans of the world as well. Even, Mike Evans has been doing it forever, no matter who the quarterback is in Tampa. So I don't have as big a problem with that as some of the others. Some rumors lately, TJ Watt I don't know why the Eagles keep coming up on these lists. Howie is not going to throw the bank at this guy, give him more money than Jalen's making, Hurts is making, and displace the defense, displace what they do on defense. Um, would he be a hell of a player for the Eagles? You're right, he would be. However, I don't see it happening. The contract doesn't fit. The Eagles like to stay young. He is pushing 30. Same with Trey Hendrickson. The Bengals people have him being traded to the Eagles. Not going to happen. It's really not. I don't see these big contract guys, especially in their 30s, even though they're productive as heck, coming over to the Eagles. I would be surprised if that happens. The other rumor I'm hearing is Von Miller. And it's like, really? Again, the Eagles got younger. If they wanted to keep veterans, they would have signed, everybody that they would have re-signed Slay. They would not have let Sweaty go. It's just not happening. So I don't know why these names keep coming up around the Eagles. Everybody's saying their defensive line is weaker now. But what they forget is the Eagles rotated guys. Milton Williams, somebody said to him in New England, why didn't you play as much with the Eagles? And he was like, well, it was rotation, so I had to wait for my time. And he still played over 300 snaps. And when you figure that over 16 games, he was still playing 20 defensive plays a game. So these guys were getting plenty of experience. And I'm sure Vic would have had something to say if, hey, go get these guys. But he hasn't said that, at least not that I've heard out in public. So I don't see Von Miller coming here. I don't see TJ Watt coming to Philly. Just not going to happen. It doesn't fit with their contract structure. The Eagles are going to pay their guys that they want to pay. And next year they have, Jalen Carter's contract coming up after this season. So, there'll be money on the table to keep Jalen. I think Nolan Smith's contract is coming up soon. So, yeah, because they got Nolan and Jalen in the same draft. So you're going to see, how he's going to spend some money on defense. Everybody's expecting the cap to go up significantly over the next couple of years. So I see him spreading those hits out on those guys, keeping the team a little bit younger. Because those guys are only like 26, 27 years old, 25 years old. So they're not going anywhere. I really believe Sweaty wanted to be back with Gannon. So I don't think even if the Eagles offered him a reasonable contract, he would have stayed. So the other exciting news, and this is probably more important than anything else I talked about, is the Eagles are opening training camp on Friday. They're one of the few teams where rookies and veterans come in at the same time, and I believe that that's part of Nick's his strategy of building team is you don't separate them out. They come in, they've gotten to know each other, but the big question mark coming into training camp is Makuba. All these second round picks, because of what the Browns and Texans did, offering people guaranteed contracts, have second round picks wanting guaranteed contracts. And I really see that, Howie's going to have to do something before Friday. He probably doesn't want to give out a guaranteed contract, but he's pretty savvy. I can see, the money being the same, but there being some signing bonuses. There'll be, roster bonuses. There'll be things that will guarantee Makuba his money over the long haul. So I don't see that going to be as big an issue for the Eagles as it will be for other teams, that their second round picks aren't there. Especially since the Eagles are relying on Makuba to take a plate, take one of the big roles in the secondary. That was part of why CJ's gone. It's part of why Darius is gone. Big play's gone. So that's kind of what I see there. The other thing is that I'm hearing a lot about, a lot of scuttlebutt, is whether or not starters should play in the preseason. This has been something that I noticed Sirianni doesn't like to do. He likes to sit his starters, maybe a series in the third game against the Jets, which is Eagles have been playing the Jets in the preseason as long as I can remember, or at least the majority of the time. So, but I don't see it when they open up their preseason schedule against the Bengals. I don't see it when they play the Browns either, that any of the starters will play. However, I have a feeling that that's why the team sometimes looks like they're still in the preseason when they play that first game. So I'm not saying the Eagles are going to lose the Cowboys, but I think it's going to be a closer game when they open up the season than it should be. And I think Dallas has improved. So I think, especially on offense, I don't know who's blocking now that Zach Martin retired, but I don't see, I don't see a Cowboy win, but who knows if the Eagles come out flat like they sometimes do out of the gate, from the starters not having played in the preseason, I can see that being a hindrance. Um, so do I believe the starters should play? Maybe not the first game because you're still trying to trim the roster. You got 90 guys, you got to get down to 53. Mike Golick once said that he would have never made the Eagles. Excuse me. He would have never made the Eagles if it wasn't for being able to play in preseason games, being able to get that workout in. And that's sort of my knock. Teams are saying, "Oh, let's go to 20 games, and then we don't have to have a preseason." But you know what that becomes? The first 4 games of the year are going to be basically preseason games. They're going to be sloppy. They're going to be, teams are going to win games that probably they shouldn't have had any right of winning against teams that, will be there at the end, but now have this stupid loss on their schedule. So I think starters should play at least a quarter in that last game. I'm probably in the minority in that. Everybody's going to say injury, injury, injury. Um, there's already been a couple injuries in the NFL. If you pick up the injury reports of just guys who have been hurt playing basketball before, hanging out with family over the holidays, or um, Jason Pierre-Paul, a number of years ago, sounds like he wants to come back and play for the Giants one more time. Um, blew off a couple fingers lighting off fireworks over 4th of July. So guys can get hurt, even before the season starts, even before preseason starts. So the argument is real, but I would rather take a chance on looking good the first week and beating teams that I should beat, versus getting off to a slow start. It's like last year, people wanted to hang Sirianni after being 2-2. To me, those first 4 games was the preseason for the starters. They never, since they didn't even suit up in any of the preseason games. So that's kind of where I stand on the preseason. As far as camp, I want to come back around to that. Hey, Friday is an exciting day. It's going to be great to see who's there. It's going to be great to see if Makuba's there. All right. So, last thing I have here on my big list is my son's still working on his list. It's taking him a little longer than he anticipated. He's also got some other things going on with work and stuff, but that's something he and I have been talking about, though, is getting into this. What would be the Eagles' all-time 53-man roster? The Let's see. So with that, the rules are they had to be with the Eagles at least 5 years. So no TO. I think I mentioned that last week. Either had to be drafted or a free agent. We talked about like Keith Jackson being the tight end or one of the tight ends. Turned out he only played for the Eagles for 4 years. So he doesn't meet that 5-year threshold. My son's a big fan of, he's very historical on his views of football. So he's, looking at like Pete Pios from the 1948 team, 47, 48, 49 team. He's an Eagle all-time great. Even though he was he more or less played as a tight end. So he's probably going to be one of the tight ends. Um, Unfortunately, one of my favorites may not make the team as a running back, and that was Wilbert Montgomery, because I'll still remember the run he ripped off against Dallas just to take the lead in the NFC Championship game, and the Eagles didn't look back. Um, but you also have to look at who they've had: Shady, Westbrook, and we're talking about an exception for Saquon. You can't rush for over 2,000 yards and not be considered a team great, even though it's only been 1 yard. But that he's also, I think, appealing to my Penn State fandom to include Saquon in that list. But we're hoping to get 5 years out of Saquon, so he'll be on that list, down the road. And of course, Van Buren will definitely be one of the best. Quarterbacks, that's a little trickier. Finding guys who have been on this team for 5 years and started and played well. And, I talked to him about guys in the 70s, Barilla, Roman Gabriel, but those guys weren't with the team very long. So probably Jaws, Randall, McNabb, and, Hurts. He's just made his 5th year. So, it's going to be a really cool list when we get done with it. I'm also searching out offensive linemen, things like that. Some of the other positions are a little bit harder because you hear about the big names, in the skill areas and even in the defensive backs and stuff like that. B-Doc being one of the all-time Eagle grades. So it'll be interesting. We're going to come up with a list. We're still working on it. But I did want to tease that a little bit too. So y'all have a good day, and we'll talk more as training camp gets underway, because I'm sure there might be breaking news. And I'm going to try to start doing these videos a little more frequently during training camp to stay up to date with all the Eagle news. Have a great day.